Hey, hey everybody. Um, Fair day here. I was planning on my next upload being the last part of my elemental series on Earth, and I will in fact get to that. Wearing my tree beard t-shirt today, but um, I've had a bee in my bonnet for a while now, about some questions around the topic that I'm seeing flung about a bit about cultural appropriation, and it's a very interesting topic and it's very complex. People online I keep seeing throw it around like it's a very simple thing, and they point their fingers at each other and there are accusations, and I think a lot of it is maybe people who don't know a lot about what they're talking about. Um, and it's complex enough where I sort of think that it needs more of a discussion or more thoughts. I have more thoughts on it than I can probably put down in a video. Um, so it's probably a better idea to do a blog post and go into a great detail and take my time and say it right and hit a whole lot of points. And I'm a Libra, guys, so I see points on every side of the issue. Um, it's a real thing and it needs to be addressed. At the same time, there are some people who are overblowing about it and don't know where to draw lines, and who are just using it as one more reason to attack other people or a system that they don't like, or try and make themselves feel special in some way by saying, "This belongs to me, you can't have it." Mostly I'm seeing it a lot of I'm seeing a lot of it that is legitimate concern, but I'm seeing a lot of more of it that looks to me like people saying, um, "You're wrong," because there's a lot of people who just like to do that. But during a meditation recently, during my morning ritual work and meditative work, um, an idea stuck in my head that wants to be expressed in video, and it's along the lines of a question. And it's putting aside huge amounts of the issue. I mean, when I talk about it needing a blog post, it's because it involves an understanding of history and an understanding of cultures, an understanding of the way people and cultures and history interact, the way ideas bounce into each other and merge and unmerge and move around, and over long periods of time, that's very complex. But what came to me during the meditation was actually a simple question which involves not so much culture with a big C and people grabbing things or adding things or borrowing things, but it was more about magic as religion. And I know there's a lot of talk going on these days too, where you're supposed to say magic and religion are different things. You can be a part of a religion that practices magic, but magic doesn't have to be religious. And I've always believed that. In ceremonial magic, for example, you usually take an oath that's prefaced by nothing in this oath will be contrary to your civil or religious obligation. And I've always believed that. Lately, though, I've been looking at magic and wondering if that's really true. And I suppose that's probably another topic entirely. Um, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to work on the assumption, which you may disagree with, and you're more than welcome to, and there are probably days when I will agree with you because I've agreed with you in the past. But I'm going to work on the assumption that magic, to some extent, is religious in that it only works if you're working with a higher power of some sort. That higher power could be your own higher self. Um, if you're working from a psychological model, it could be just aspects of yourself. If you're working from a psychic model, it could be your own power. Um, it could be spirits other than gods. Um, all of that is true, and all of that is good for an argument, but I'm working on the assumption here that magic works by dealing with something transcendental to your regular, daily, mundane personality. And that can include your higher self or your own psychic powers, except for those people who were born so psychic that they just have had them every minute of the day for their entire life. I know there are some people who might think that when you're working with magic, you're just working with energies, dumb, brute, blind forces. And there are other people who see all of that as being intelligent, living creatures. And to me, that's kind of like in physics, where scientists who are looking to look at matter and energy as particulate, and scientists who are trying to look at matter and energy as waves, see matter and energy as particles or waves, depending on what they're looking for, and that it's really a matter of the scientist's perspective, not the way nature really is. Um, I think I think if you're looking to do magic under the assumption that you're dealing with blind, dumb energies, that's what you see. And if you're looking to do magic that you're dealing with spirits, I shouldn't say dealing, but working with or using or in a relationship with spirits, then that's what you see, and that's what you get. Um, and at the moment, I'm sort of looking at life as everything being intelligent and alive. So to me, these days, it seems like when you go to the altar, when you're doing magic, you are dealing with something transcendental to yourself. You might as well call that religious. Um, there are a lot of problems. Again, defining religion is a topic all by itself. Um, I've lately seen some debate from like Eastern theologians about the fact that the definition of religion is Western based, and as such, it doesn't actually help anyone to understand Eastern religion, and it doesn't help Easterners to understand the difference between Eastern and Western religion. It just has a Western assumption that religion is A, B, C, D, and E, and Eastern religion doesn't fit into that. Therefore, definitions have to be rethought. And I find that very, very interesting. I don't know where my own thought process is going to end up as I look into that. For my purposes right here and now in this conversation, if anyone wants to have this conversation with me, or if anybody sees this, um, I'm just going with the bare basic. Magic is dealing with something transcendental to your average mundane personality or persona, and that is, I'm going to say, religious. So the question, so a lot of circling around trying to get definitions right. That's my education, and that's being a Libra. I want to have terms where you know what I'm talking about and thinking about it for the as a basis for conversation. The question that was in my meditation was that came to me in my meditation was, what do the gods think about this whole cultural appropriation thing and this whole saying, when you worship my God, you're doing it wrong, that traditionally it's this way, or I've been told by my God to do it this other way, or my teacher said to do it this way, or the great religions of the world have said to do it this way, or 3,000 years ago they did it this way. What what do the gods think about all that? And I think trying to get a grip on that, I don't think I have an answer to it, but I think in trying to get a grip on it and think about it, it first occurs to me that there's like maybe three ways you can approach religion with questions like this. And I don't think I've ever smoked in one of these videos before. I do in some of my tarot readings, and I think I'm going to now. Um, I don't know how YouTube feels about that. If you want to write me comments about how bad it is, feel free, because, A, I know, so it doesn't hurt to hear it again. B, not enough people are, nobody's writing comments on these anyway, so, any comments at all are probably a good thing. In any event, three ways to sort of look at religion in this context, and one of those is that religion is about you. I don't have a problem with that per se, using religion, using magic to empower yourself, to self-actualize, to, you know, if you've got a bad self-image, to boost it up. I don't see that as necessarily being a bad thing or to automatically disqualify it. However, I have to say that if your religion is about you and building up yourself, you're pointing at somebody else and saying, "That's wrong. My God doesn't want it that way. You're stealing something from me, and you're stealing something from my culture, and you're wrong." If if your religion is actually about you, then no, nobody's wrong. Nobody's stealing anything from you. You're doing your own thing, and that's all well and fine. Leave everybody else alone to do their thing. That's as simple as that. Another way to look at it is religion is about your relationship between you and your God. And I'm not sure whether or not that's a real thing. It seems to me the third thing is that your religion is about your God. If your religion is about your relationship between you and your God, then to me it seems like it's either the first one or the third one. Either it's really about you or it's really about your God. And that might make more sense as I go along. And most of what I want to talk about is probably number three. And I know there are going to be exceptions to everything that I say from this point forward. Probably there have been exceptions to everything that I've said so far in my entire life, period. But um, if your religion is about your God, then that question, what does your God think about a cultural appropriation? What does your God think about pointing and saying, you're doing it wrong, becomes a fundamental issue. And I think part of the problem with determining that is that we don't necessarily remember that, with exceptions, most gods aren't human. We anthropomorphize them because it helps us to get a grip on them mentally. They may appear to us in anthropomorphized ways in order to help us get a grip on them. But by and large, they aren't human. They don't think the way we think. They don't feel the way we feel. Yes, we have thousands of years of mythology in which the gods look like, they're a little better than, Marvel or DC superheroes in their costumes with superpowers, but other than that, they're completely human. I'm going to go to Zeus a lot because Greek mythology is so well documented over such an enormous period of time. Um, the ancient Greeks had the advantage of being literate and prolific over a very long period of time. So there's so much ancient literature on them that it's easy to point to them as examples of what I'm saying. That doesn't mean that I worship the Greek gods or that I am endorsing that as my form of paganism that everybody should jump up and endorse. It's just that I find them to be useful, readily accessible examples. But we get stories of Zeus's picadillos, his chasing of women around, and so many of those stories make him seem so human, just extremely powerful. But there's something that you have to remember about stories like that, and that's not only is there that whole process of anthropomorphizing going on, but ancient religion in particular, and this plays a part in why cultural appropriation is such a big story. Ancient religions in particular were not real super unified. I mean, like every town and village basically had its own religion and its own concept of what their gods looked like, and they could be very close to each other or very different from each other. And that makes perfect sense because there was no mass communication. I mean, they didn't have the internet or TV or radio. Um, they didn't have a mass printing press. While the Greeks in particular might have had a class of scholars who were very literate, they didn't produce, you know, 10,000 copies of each book that was written and distribute them in bookstores across the land. They were, written by hand over long periods of time, and people who could afford them and really wanted them might have had a bunch of them, but they weren't so spread out that everyone said, "Ah, yes, this is what Zeus is like." Um, as a result, cultural appropriation went city by city. Um, Above and beyond that, when you're talking about religions that existed for thousands of years, they went through stages. So with like ancient Greek mythology, there was a literary phase where there got to be a class of popular writers. And when I say writers, it all originally got written down, but it was more along the lines of popular um, poets who traveled from town to town and city to city and sang their songs of mythology from memory, and people memorized these and traveled around and sang them. And in some ways, it became a little like TV in that much of it was designed around the idea of popularity. These guys made their living singing their songs, and their topics were mythology, and they call it sort of a romantic period where it became less about theology or magic or belief and more about, hey, let's gather a crowd who are all gonna, chip in a couple of coins, and um, people will be entertained, and if I'm doing my job well, maybe a little enlightened. But during that period, you get myths that are much more anthropomorphized, um, the way you'd expect Zeus on a TV show to be anthropomorphized. So if you see mythology and it seems like the gods are really human, take that into account. On the other hand, some themes repeat often enough where you do have to wrestle with them. And we're not here to wrestle with Zeus's libido at the moment, although it's probably another interesting topic. Um, when you go further back in history, you still have an idea like we have in modern magic that as above, so below. But it doesn't necessarily mean today quite as much mystically. It doesn't necessarily mean back then quite as much mystically as it does today. Um, for example, for the common man, maybe not for the priests or the magicians, but for the common guy on the street, common person, as above, so below has a context of your city state and my city state have gone to war. It means my gods and your gods have also gone to war. And if you and your people and your culture defeat me and my people and my culture, then your gods have also defeated my gods. And that most of the time back then doesn't necessarily mean, it can, but very often it doesn't mean that your gods are just completely eradicated from human history and thought. It means that your gods are now vassals to their gods, the way your city is now a vassal to their city. And as a result, religions expanded. And again, this is probably more for a much longer topic about this, um, about how ideas spread and how cultural appropriation has worked in the past. Um, but that made sense to them, and that's sort of the way they saw it. And we look at things a bit differently these days. Um, in any event, I'm allowing myself to go off track. Um, gods are don't think the same way we do, and how can they, given even I mean I can think of a million ways why they're different. Why does a storm or the idea of beauty personified, or you know these abstract or natural forces that we've given name to and see and interact with as personalities, um, how can they possibly think the way that we do? Now, I know there is a thought among many that gods are people, and I don't disagree with that. That gods are persons, that they are actual entities, that they have personalities, that they exist as personalities, and I don't disagree with that. But even if you just look at them from the idea of their sheer longevity. Don't underestimate the force. Aha, that's my little timer telling me that it is now the hour of Saturn on the day of the sun. And that actually leads into this point somewhat. Um, if you're talking about a god who's involved in creation, then you're talking about a god who's billions of years old, who has existed so much longer than humanity and will exist so much longer than humanity, how can they possibly think the way we do? Even, returning to Zeus. Zeus is not one of the Greek creator gods. He's the ruler of the universe. He takes control of the universe from his father. When he does this, according to some of the myths that I've seen, humanity already exists. So humanity may predate Zeus, or if Zeus is the storm, Zeus might predate humanity, but humanity is created prior to his becoming king of the universe. In any event, the story goes that upon becoming king of the universe, Zeus decided that he was going to wipe humanity out. It doesn't say, at least not in my memory, I might be remembering wrong, but I don't remember him having a particularly anti-human stance per se. It's just that his father, Saturn, created humanity, and he just wanted to, wipe us away and create something of his own in our place, in our niche in reality, um, because, he's king of the universe. He wants to be the mover and shaker and builder, and he wants, instead of us, he wants something that he made himself. And the reason we're still here is because Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to us, and that changed something in us so fundamentally that by Zeus's own code of ethics, whatever that may be, he couldn't just wipe us out en masse and destroy us. And I guess that's another great mystery and another great topic. What the heck did Prometheus do to humanity where Zeus felt like ethically he couldn't just wipe us out? In any event, given how long humanity's been around, that makes Zeus enormously old. Um, and if he is to some extent the storm, then there's every indication he will be here much longer than we will. How can we hope to understand something with a big picture, long view that's that big? How do we understand on an issue like cultural appropriation the thoughts and feelings of something that so completely transcends humanity and culture itself? Um, an example of ancient cultural appropriation and Zeus and stories that have come down to us that sort of illustrate the whole time consciousness thing is the Trojan War. One of the greatest ancient documents that we have is the Iliad. In the Iliad, it is made extremely clear that during the Trojan War, Zeus is on the side of the city of Troy. He loves the city of Troy. It is his favorite city on the planet. The people in it are his favorite people. And yet, in the end, he does not defend Troy or intervene to protect it. He's even sort of throws some of his power against it. And the reason for that is because Hera and Athena want Troy destroyed so badly that they will make him miserable for uncountable periods of time if he doesn't give in to them on this. And again, this is anthropomorphizing, and it seems so human. You get sort of a beleaguered, stereotypical beleaguered house husband, um, giving in to a nagging wife and a strong daughter in order to have peace in the home. how we translate into that into transcendental divinity and concepts like the storm, marriage, wisdom, warfare. Those are big, big, big things, and their relationship is probably not like that. Again, fruitful ideas for thought and meditation, not really the point here. Zeus decides to destroy to be involved in the destruction of, or to allow the destruction of his favorite city and his favorite people because of his relationship to these other deities. And that, in and of itself, has to make me question how a god is going to feel if we're whining that we have a special relationship with that God and we've been instructed in our God in A, B, C, and D, and now there's this other person doing this other thing, and it isn't what we do and it isn't what we thought, and yet they're saying that they're worshiping this God, and we're angry about it. And I can't help but think that the attitude is going to be, so what? Simply because we have this idea of Zeus, you know, setting aside these mortal relationships because of things going on in the divine-verse that we're not privy to or that we don't understand. Above and beyond that, the story gets culturally appropriated. The Romans, in their great national epic, the Aeneid, during the age of Augustus Caesar in Rome, steal the story and steal the characters, and they write a sequel. And in the sequel, Zeus, aka Jupiter, with a longer term thing in mind than we can look at because we're talking, thousands of years. Zeus causes, helps and aids some of the people fleeing the destruction of Troy to survive. And in a story culturally appropriated from the Odyssey, Aeneas goes on this journey around the Mediterranean and has adventures, and eventually Zeus settles him in Italy, where over time his family becomes the founding of Rome. In fact, Aeneas's mother was Venus Aphrodite, and the Caesars, as a result, claimed descent from Venus Aphrodite. They had divine blood and therefore had the right to rule. The divine right of kings was more literal in the ancient world than it became in the medieval world, when it was just that God really liked the king. In the ancient world, the king was, a relative. But the gist of the story is that Rome grows up and conquers, the known world for them, which isn't really true. I mean, they knew about China and India, for example. But Rome, in their own mind, conquers the world and rules the world from the city of Rome, and that Zeus may have allowed for the destruction of his favorite city and his favorite people, but he preserved them to an extent that they became a new, better, more powerful city that rules the world, and that Zeus, Jupiter's name and temples are spread to every corner of the world. And that's anthropomorphizing again. That's self-aggrandizement. That's the Romans saying, look at us, look at how cool we are, look at how great we are. But at the same time, what do we suppose Zeus actually thinks about this story? If you're looking over a very long period of time, I have a suspicion that even though there's cultural appropriation involved, on some level he could be involved in it. Um, why do I say that? Because in the Western world, so much of our culture, not little individual cultures, um, not necessarily Eastern cultures or African cultures, but so much European culture is so incredibly based on Rome. Yes, we have Germanic and Celtic and Slavic cultures that have mixed in, but if you know enough about Rome, you really can't look anywhere without seeing elements of it in our daily lives that show its longevity. And that includes the fact that there are still stories being told about Jupiter and Zeus and statues being built, and to people who are part of a pagan revival, he is so available to us intellectually and culturally that we could be drawn to work with him. So if you're looking at your life in a lifespan of millions of years, and if for some reason it's important for you to be involved with humanity, the whole Rome deal is actually not a bad deal for that god. Um, that said, that's entirely just speculating, storytelling, spinning wheels, and I don't have any idea what Zeus thinks about Rome or Greece or you or me or the United States or Australia or Europe today. The fact of the matter is that um, in the long run, it might have nothing about him. You can sort of anthropologically and archaeologically cut a swath across the map and see Thor, Perun, Zeus, um, Baal Hadad, Indra, and see thunderstorm gods as rulers of the universe across a broad spectrum of humanity. And that takes us beyond the idea of gods as personalities per se and more into the archetypal realm. I tend to think more in the natural realm, that the storm is this huge thing that looks at us in different faces. But I think the point works no matter what way you're looking. The fact is, if you're Zeus and you're worshipped in ancient Greece on the map, and you succeed in getting worshipped in ancient Rome on the map, you're talking more real estate. Um, I love Neil Gaiman's American Gods, and I heard or read somewhere Thor Mooney saying that it's required reading for members of her coven, and I think that's great. Um, one of the ideas in that is that gods are sort of jostling for space in the human mind. Um, Before the rise of internet memes, there was actually a philosophical meme theory that thoughts, ideas, are kind of like viruses that are traveling between mind, looking for hosts, and when they settle down in a mind, you can't get rid of them. Even if you don't like them, they're always going to be in your mind. You're infected. The question is whether or not you spread them. And in Gaiman's American Gods, there's this idea that gods are looking for space in human minds. I don't know if gods are really looking for space in human minds, and I don't know why they need it. But again, if that were true, cultural appropriation or not, gods might very well just want space in minds. And again, you've got a culture that tells you to deal with your God this way, and maybe even you are very skilled at communing with your God, and your God wants you to work this way. Does that exclude your God from working with somebody else some different way and give you a right to say, no, this isn't the way my God wants it? Well, how do you know your God's not actually telling that person to do it this way? I mean, another possible way to look at it is to look at a God's values and see whether or not people are expressing those values. Um, I've been seeing a couple of videos lately about people who worship Bridget, and the two things that pop up off the top of my head are Bridget as compassion and Bridget as Smith forging things in fire. Um, if you worship Bridget really close to the way ancient Celts did, and you're a great scholar of that and a great lover of that, I admire that, and that's great. And I might be sitting at your feet someday to learn it because I'm interested. But if somebody else is worshiping Bridget and doing it completely differently and completely wrong by your standards, I would think before you go wagging your finger, the question you might want to ask is the person exhibiting compassion? Is the person going through a trial by fire? And if the answer to those questions is yes, why assume that this immortal being whose focus is on these qualities and who's existed longer than, you know, generations upon generations upon generations of Celts, um, why assume that this other person is wrong and just not tapping into it from another direction? Um, it really starts to seem to me like people who are saying that's wrong are acting from ego. They want to be special. They have something that they think they own, and it makes them feel special, and they don't want other people to take that away from them. And I get that, but I don't know that it's appropriate with gods. I mean, you can't own your god. I don't even know if you can own your culture. Again, something for a possible blog post someday is, do you own your culture or do you participate in your culture? If somebody comes along and steals from your culture, are they stealing from you or are they joining you in some way? Um, it's there's a lot of questions there, but I think looking to the gods for answers is not the worst of things because the gods being so much bigger than us, I think I think they see our culture probably as being very finite and very temporary, and that what they're about is probably much bigger than that. And that if it's about you, well, then it's about you, and then you and I have to deal with the fact that you and me are here now. But to try and make it about the gods is just not taking into account how big the gods are. Um, and I think we're up on 45 minutes here. I think we're probably going longer than I intended. I'm not sure that I said everything that I wanted to say. I didn't do notes. When something occurs to me in meditation, I should probably write it down more. Um, but I'm sort of going off the top of my head and through inspiration here. Um, I guess I kind of wanted to end with a story from the Bible, and I know, the audience that I'm going for is not big on the Bible, but one thing you've got to say about the Bible is that It's legitimately an ancient document. It's a collection of ancient documents. It's extremely old, and as much rotten stuff is in there, there are bits of legitimate wisdom as well. And there's this one bit where this ancient hierarchical hereditary priesthood is very offended by a new cult which uses their words and phrases and ideas about God and has changed them in their opinion, and they don't like it, and they consider it blasphemous and heretical, and they want to wipe it out. Um, and at least one person on the subject of cultural appropriation has talked to me about something similar to this, in that she was expressing the fact that she sees people using names and ideas from her ancient religion, and they're pronouncing it wrong, and they don't have all the ideas just right, and it hurts her to see something sacred to her trodden upon that way. And I get that. I mean, the sacred is beautiful and valuable, and it means something to you. And that's the position this hierarchical priesthood was. They have this thing that's sacred to them, and here's these people doing this new, different stuff with it, and they're angry because it's blasphemy. And one of their members offers up a bit of advice, which is to let it go. That if these new people are just people, if this is just a human thing, if it's a completely human phenomena, it'll be a flash in the pan. Maybe not necessarily I'm adding this, but maybe not by our standards, but by a God standards, sure, it's going to come and go. If this thing is from God, we can't fight against it anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. It's going to be here, and we're going to have to live with it because we can't fight God. They say they're going to take the advice, and they don't. And the story can be used in many ways by many people of different religions to prove different points. The only point that I had here was that before you go saying you're wrong, you're a thief, you're stealing from me, you're stealing from my God, you're trampling on things that I consider sacred, you have to consider that if you're dealing with a huge, huge, huge thing that's much, much bigger than you, and much, much bigger than your culture, and much, much bigger than everything that you hold sacred, even if you think that God told you that these things are sacred, unless you can figure out some way to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that your God isn't working with those people, pointing your finger and wagging your tongue and telling them that they're wrong and that they're thieves and how bad they are is maybe undercutting your own opportunity to expand your awareness. Um, I haven't touched on the idea of divine revelation much, um, and I should, even briefly. The fact is, the major Western religions that have been extant for a very long time both have divine revelation as a centerpiece of their exoteric and even esoteric religion. And I think one of the appeals of magic in all of its forms is the idea that we can do that. We can have that divine revelation. Maybe it's through our tarot cards. Maybe it's through strong feelings we get in meditation. Maybe it's through communications with spirits. Maybe our work with our deity is so intense that we feel we're getting actual direct communication from our deity. And I don't doubt any of it. However, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that our egos are such that we can, through lack of experience and ignorance and an overabundance of ego, take any sufficiently powerful emotion, idea, or impulse that runs through our brain and label it divine intuition or divine revelation and run with it, even though it's not. Even a legitimate divine revelation stands the chance of being distorted by our egos, by our personalities, by how much we don't know. Um, Even if you know a lot, and even if you've meditated yourself into a position where you can distinguish between what's from your ego and your personality and what comes to you from beyond, there's the possibility that expressing it is going to distort it. Divine revelation is a tricky business, and people who believe unquestionably that they know the will of their God and who believe that their culture is right and this other thing is wrong are responsible for so much ill in this world. I mean, people want to point to Christianity and talk about all the harm it's done, and they're not wrong in that. On the other hand, they also talk about Christianity like it's one thing. And if you look at the founding of the United States and the ideas behind freedom of religion, part of what they were thinking about freedom of religion was that you're free to be an Episcopalian or you're free to be a Presbyterian, and that Episcopalianism and Presbyterianism are two distinct religions. And I think Episcopalians and Presbyterians both see themselves as Christian, as do Catholics and Orthodox and Southern Baptists and all these other people. But I think it's wrong to point to Christianity when there were actual human beings who are part of different sects and different groups and different historical periods doing different things. Um, the same is probably true of Judaism and Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's certainly true of modern neo-paganism, where sectarianism is even greater because we've come to a point in history where we have the magical technology to create designer religion. I think that's a good thing. But if that designer religion goes around making the mistakes of saying, my revelation is superior to your revelation, my culture is superior to your culture, or your culture is evil because it stole from my culture, and constant argument and fighting, even if it doesn't boil into bloodshed, that aggression and fighting is just the descendant of that religious warfare. And part of the big problem we're facing right now in countries all over the world is a return to tribalism. Anthropologists and psychological historians and people have been pointing to it for a very long time, since like the 70s. And now the media is beginning to take it seriously. Tribalism, tribalism, tribalism. It is a trouble, and it is a problem, and it is dividing us during a time when we need to be united more than ever, if only to fight, global warming, for Christ's sake. Um, it isn't a good thing to add to that tribalism by saying, my revelation is right, your revelation is wrong, my culture is right, your culture is wrong, you're stealing from my culture, don't do that. I think you have to let the gods and the spirits and the forces at the altar defend themselves. And you have to realize that culture, as big as it seems to us and the world at large, and as important as it is, I mean, it made us. We're programmed with it. We're going to program our children and our students with it. As much as it is like water to fish, it's tiny compared to the forces at the altar. And I hope nobody's over super offended by that. I'm not talking about the politics, which is very different. And I'm not talking about the economics, which is very different. I'm talking about the religion and the magic. And I hope that at the very least I was thought provoking and that nobody's offended and that people want to discuss it. Thanks. Bye bye.